Peter Phok, it is such an honor to speak with you here on Movie Maker because you have executive produced two of my favorite movies of this year. I just saw Pearl the other night, and it is gorgeous and not at all what you expect in a horror movie. Just so beautifully done. And I keep seeing, I just want to get this out of the way because I keep seeing that the budget for this movie was $1 million, and watching it, I couldn't understand how that could possibly be possible. Is that anywhere near accurate?
I don't think that's true at all. No, yeah, I think
Okay.
that's Pearl. No, absolutely not. Yeah, we
Okay.
had a little bit more than $1 million to make the film, but yeah, really grateful for our partners at A24 for supporting us in giving us the opportunity to really kind of like build out Thai's cinematic universe that now exists here.
Yeah, that number's been widely reported. And just looking at the way that you have a town from 1918, I guess you got to reuse the set from X. The actors, the fact that you shot it in New Zealand, I was thinking there's absolutely no way this was $1 million. And if it was, you're the greatest producer who ever lived.
No, yeah, I think that's some misreporting, yeah, somewhere, but no, we were really fortunate to get that opportunity to get into New Zealand to make X, and if we were just do a little bit of history, if we go back to 2013, actually 2012, that summer, Ty West, Jacob Jaffke, and we were down in Savannah, Georgia, to make a movie called The Sacrament. And and what Ty, kind of felt about it is that we built a town in the Sacrament, and then to see it go away after, it was only probably 4 or 5 weeks of production, and everything we built goes away, and it's sort of very sad and wasteful. And so he wanted to approach, because the construction that was done in X was a lot more, and to see all that, that art, the craftsmen doing the work to build like the bunkhouse and for it to go away. So he conceived an idea of like, well, what if we were to go back in a prequel, and then we could just, revitalize the location. And that's something that the art department is able to do, and it was cost effective, and that was sort of, number of reasons why it made sense for ultimately the studio to say yes and support, this sort of vision. I mean, on top of the fact that the Pearl script is incredible.
Yeah. You get to see the old creaky Texas Chainsaw Massacre farmhouse when it was young and pretty. It's a very cool, you're kind of like going home to old friends. And of course you get to see the alligator. I guess it's probably the alligator's grandfather. I don't know how long they live.
I think that's, yeah, it's up for debate of, because some alligators can, I guess, can live quite some time. But yeah, no, all of it was, and because the decision to make Pearl was sort of made early enough in the pre-production of X, there was a lot of kind of like, Easter eggs that were planted in the movie. And I think if you go back and revisit X, it sort of really complements each other. And I think that's the fun part. I mean, it's like, it's the, as a movie lover, it's something that I always enjoy, of just seeing how integrated, two movies can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially two movies that are 6 months apart where you can really notice the things freshly as opposed to having to go back and watch it, with a year's difference or more. Can we talk about just your journey to becoming a filmmaker? Like when did you know in childhood that you wanted to do it?
I think in high school, kind of started really going to the movies and really exploring. Certainly grew up in the 90s, where video stores were very popular, and we had Hollywood Video, we had Blockbuster Video, and those were always like a place to go and find like a lot of comfort in being able to like just search and look at movies and a lot of video covers, and so I watched a lot of different movies, and kind of really just like got enamored with this concept of like movie making and how special it is for an audience, and where it can just take you to these places. And you're in high school, so these are formative years, and and everyone's asking you, what do you want to do? And I said something, I would love to make movies. And then somebody challenged me like, oh, you can't do that, you got to know somebody. And you go, well, why not? Like, free country. And as someone who was kind of firstborn in my family in the US, I kind of grew up with this idea of like, it's a land of opportunity. And so I just felt if I could do the hard work and keep my head down and focus, I should be able to get there, or at least, really feel like I'm giving it my all. And so that was the mentality I took, and got into, kind of like reading about filmmaking itself early on, and was fortunate to get into a filmmaking class in my junior year of high school, which was this like 2-day class, 2-day crash course in filmmaking. It was one day of line producing and one day of like, all right, what happens after you make the movie? But that day, Dov Simmons teaches this class, and it still exists today. And like, it really inspired me as like, I think a 16-year-old to be like, whoa, you could just like go make this movie. And I think his mantra was like 37 checks you have to write to make a movie. And I was like, all right. And I had a business acumen in high school. I was in like this Future Business Leader America. I was competing in these different competitions. And once I got into college, I ran an eBay business. I just had this sort of like business sensibility about me. But I went to school of visual arts. This is where I met Ty West, and in our freshman year. And we started, working on short films together, supporting one another. There was a sort of a work ethic that was sort of bonded, because, when you see someone else working late at night in the editorial bays, you're just like, oh, cool, what are you working on? And I think it started from there. But I just loved movies, and just being around other people who like movies, and then that it kind of started from there. And I watched a lot of different movies, but then I met Ty, and he was so well watched, and going to visit his hometown, to go make the short films there, and it would always be like, in his family's basement, like we'd watch something, and it was always such a a good vibe, and connection. And so I think that really kind of shaped, it's like, this is something that's possible. And so film school was very formative in basically exposing me to the craft. I'm very excited about working with film and editing and all the elements. And I'm naturally inclined to a lot of technical stuff, so I fall into post-production. And when you're starting out, I mean, as a directing major, you still need someone to facilitate and produce. And that was something that like became a challenge in making short films. It was like, somebody's got to focus on that, and it's something that I kind of started to naturally fall towards. And as I got out of SVA, I was fortunate to get his first feature financed, and that was by Glass Eye Pix, Larry Fezen's production company. And Larry, if you don't know him, is this incredible East Village filmmaker, supporter of the arts, running this amazing production company that's given opportunities to so many filmmakers. And so we were so fortunate to go and make The Roost. And a lot of us who went to SVA together worked on that movie, Ty's first feature. And that's started the ball rolling. The Roost went on to play a number of film festivals, and it started to like kind of get build the career for Ty in his exposure as a director. And then we kind of regrouped again to make more films. And this is also when DV videos coming out, so you're getting like more access to being able to make films. And at the end of the day, it's like your shooting format is important to what you're making, but it's not the most important, because at the end of the day, it's still the story and the script and the characters, and the journey you're taking your audience on. And so we were able to kind of experiment by making some really no budget films, with Trigger Man. And then I, at that point, got involved with Larry into producing other filmmakers' movies, and being on the ground as a physical producer, line producing, and it's running. And when you don't have a lot of resources in terms of budget, you get more creative and how to approach. And I think all that has shaped all of us into being kind of better filmmakers, because I think sometimes when you're put in that corner, you can come up with a really great solve.
Do you remember Larry Fessenden's son, Jack?
100%, of course. Yeah.
We just interviewed him. Obviously, he's a filmmaker now. He just made that movie.
Yeah. I have not seen Foxhole yet, but I'm well aware of it, and I'm it's incredible to see Jack, following his father's footsteps as a filmmaker. Yeah.
So I have just a million questions for you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in New York, in Long Island specifically. Sort of born in Manhattan, and then a little bit of Brooklyn. But they called back to me because I went to school in Manhattan, and I stayed in New York for about 35 years. And so it was, wow. New York had a thriving independent scene. There was a lot of people who are really dedicated to making and telling stories, and it's one of the greatest cities in the world, and really supportive for filmmaking, and especially like I think a little bit more like outside of the box filmmaking.
Mhm.
And Yeah, but then at some point I was gravitated to the West Coast, and this is where I'm calling home these days, and it's been a nice change up. But filmmaking has taken me all over the world. I would say that, and I've been fortunate to travel both for production and for film festivals.
Yeah. So how did you end up making X and Pearl in New Zealand? Did you do that after COVID, or did you just get really lucky? Because of course, New Zealand is pretty much the only country that was untouched by COVID. I mean, they sealed everything off. They're an island.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly why the movie was made there. It was basically a situation where the movie's set in Texas, and Ty and Jacob were working on kind of figuring out, and the opportunity to consider New Zealand came up, and then it just becomes like, okay, well that makes sense, but is there a location that can work?
Yeah.
And so they went off and they found this farm outside of Wellington, about 2 hours north, a town called Wanganui. And it's like, and we've done a lot of location movies in our, sort of all history working together. And so, yeah, I wasn't on the ground with them. The pandemic was going on, and so I hung back and dealt with all this post-production remotely. And so it was incredible to see the footage start coming in, and working with our editor David Kasheroff here in Los Angeles. It was funny because David and I were in the middle of the pandemic here, so we didn't meet in person until the mix. So it was a
Oh my
whole
God.
year despite being in the same city.
So were you doing all of the cloud sharing of files that people are talking about now, where they're able to upload from pretty much anywhere?
I mean, if we want to get technical, we can go there. So that was one of the challenges that I had to kind of quickly figure out, as like we committed to working with an editor in LA. We have production going 2 hours outside of Wellington. And Wellington is where our post facility is located, Park Road Post, one of Peter Jackson's companies. And our assistant editor, Scott Milligan, was posted there to. And so essentially our workflow was getting footage from set down to him, and then he would manage it and then pop it up into the cloud. We're using a system called Edit on Demand by Avid. It was brand new. It was almost like basically beta, but our friends at Avid were able to kind of quickly get us up and going. And we really leaned into the system. And the reason why is because there are other ways of editing in the cloud and stuff. This was any computer, almost anywhere. You don't need a fancy machine. You can just log into the data center where everything was hosted. And so we chose the data center closest to where David was. So here on the West Coast. And you're literally logging into using Teradici, and it basically boots into a Windows PC that opens into Avid Media Composer that's connected to an Avid Nexus. So an Avid Nexus is your shared Avid storage. And then all the way in Wellington, New Zealand, Scott is able to do the same thing.
Wow.
And it's if they're working on premises together, with the exception of the time difference, right? But then we just use that to advantage. There was always basically a tag team of like, they're able to communicate with each other, for half the day, and then the other half, someone's just working, and then the material's gonna be available. It was like, New Zealand was always a day ahead. So Scott would work into his evening, and then when David would come in, there would be stuff prepared for him. So yeah, and like any new thing, it had its fair share of hiccups, but it really did work, and we were able to like kind of sustain our schedule. And then once X had wrapped, Ty decided to jump into the edit and kind of focus on that as Pearl was going into prep, and then because we did shoot Pearl, essentially back to back.
3 weeks later.
4 weeks later, yeah, 4 weeks later.
You said Ty West said 3 weeks in a different interview, but close enough.
Yeah, it's a blur.
Unbelievable. So you did not set foot in New Zealand for either of these movies. Of course, you couldn't travel, you couldn't go anywhere.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately not. But it's a beautiful country, and I got to know and work very closely with the great people of New Zealand. We did a lot of these meetings, Zoom meetings. Yeah, it was great.
And you supervised all of the posts.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I've been doing that sort of like, out of necessity in the early movies. And so it's just it's got to get done. And I think Ty and I have such a shorthand that it's, it's like I understand what he's looking for and his expectations, and then we kind of go do it. And I think the biggest challenge on this was it was like, oh, this one movie could turn into two. Oh, it's two movies, and that really meant juggling two full movies and in their finishing calendar. While Ty's in New Zealand for basically well over a year, and while we were finishing X, he's working towards the Pearl edit and ultimately locking picture before he left New Zealand.
I mean, X ends in a way that nicely sets up a sequel with her parents looking for her. Sorry, we're gonna spoil X. But it doesn't necessarily set up a prequel. When did you know there was another sequel coming too, with MaXXXine, the one that's coming out sometime soon?
It's time. I mean, he just when he told me about X, he already told me about his idea for Pearl. And it was very exciting because it was like, and you can, and his excitement is so contagious. When he just talks about, just movies in general, you're just so, eager to kind of hear the stories. And so I think we were at some point where X was coming out. He's like, I got this idea for where, the story can go next. And it's very exciting. And I think that's a start. It's an idea, and the more you kind of talk about it, it evolves. And he and our partners at A24 has just been very supportive. And so, yeah, we just look forward to continuing, to expand this universe that he's created.
So this new one is going to be in some ways easier, I suspect, because I mean, judging from the trailer, they're going to I mean, MaXXXine is going to Hollywood, like she always wanted. Does that mean you get to shoot it in the same place this time? I mean, are you shooting it in Los Angeles, or where does it go?
Well, I mean, movie magic, we will see. I mean, I certainly hope certainly the intention is to film right here in Los Angeles and Hollywood. But I think nothing is ever set, and so we'll see. Yeah, there's a lot to still figure out. But it's an exciting journey nevertheless. Yeah, to return and of course to have me on board and continue to be on board. I mean, she is what makes this both films so special.
Yeah. Mia Goth, some of the best acting I've ever seen. And I don't mean like in a horror movie or anything like that. I mean, some of the best acting I've ever seen in that segment in Pearl. And also the long oneer. Well, I don't want to spoil too much, but there's two very long oneers that are both incredible in their own ways. The first one is shocking, and the second one is like a victory lap. It's it's incredibly good. It's an incredibly good
Yeah.
movie. Um, so I'm just excited to see them get into a bigger world because, previously this has all been around a farmhouse in a small town in 1918, a couple of other places, a church, but it seems like now you get to see her actually function in the universe.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting to see, and it's still a period film, so there's that challenge to overcome. But I think we've seen it done before, and I think like Ty is his attention to detail is so uncanny, and so it's gonna be very exciting once those sets are up and we're in the world, and it's gonna be a vibe.
Yeah. Is this it? I mean, do you keep going if MaXXXine gets a big reception? Everybody keeps saying trilogy.
I mean, honestly, I think it's less that and more just, kind of like the Ty's inspiration, right? Like, I think, when he has an idea and he's, keen to make it, I mean, it comes to fruition.
Yeah. You may already be doing it. I mean, this is a perfectly great thing to do as your main thing. And I completely admire it, but is there something that you ultimately want to do? Like, is there kind of a white whale for you?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. Go to space, right? Like that's what I want to do. And quite honestly, like, yeah, I have a deep love for science fiction horror. And I would hold Alien as one of my favorite movies. And yeah, I mean, one time, like, Ty did write a script that was set in space, and so maybe we get to go there one day. Yeah, I think that's something like I've always really liked and continue to like in you know in other movies and I've worked in video games as well, and so that's a whole nother realm that I've gotten to kind of play in.
How did you? Pearl is 100% a movie to see in a theater. It just is, or in a gigantic screen. How did you get that Technicolor feel? How did you reproduce that? That I think really has to be seen on a big screen.
Well, that's something that like Ty was very kind of keen to establish early on, and so there was a lot of look development.
Mhm.
We're working with our team at Park Road Post. Damian McConnell is our colorist, and so Ty worked with him to kind of create an initial kind of look for what the movie could be based on some test footage. And the digital and immediate interface is like it's so powerful what it can do. And so we already had done that look development on previous films, but on this for X had a very specific look, especially with the 35 and the 16. And so we wanted to really go a different direction with Pearl. But it's the same camera. So
No, really?
yeah, it's
Oh my
it's
God.
the Sony Venice, and we filmed it 4K at pretty much full resolution, basically raw. So we're capturing all that information. It's a lot of data, which is preserved, but then you kind of like down res it to a couple different flavors that are going to be for dailies and for editorial media. And something that like Ty has done in all his previous films is to kind of implement what we call that LUT and burn it into the dailies. So you have an initial look that's burned into the dailies so that everyone who's seeing the dailies kind of has a strong idea of what the movie is supposed to look like. Now, when the movie is done in editorial and we go back to finishing, we go back to that raw footage, lose the LUT, start over, get it to a place. And but I'd also say that it's not just the kind of post effects on color. I mean, the production design, the costume design played heavily into the look of Pearl, and
Mhm.
using the colors, these bright colors, to really shine through. So it was all strategized from the start, and it's because Ty has it in his head. He's just visionary in that way.
And for anybody who's not into color, the LUT is basically the palette. Is that a way to explain it? It's sort of
Yeah, I think the LUT itself is like it's like the like a lookup table, but it's a conversion, the digital conversion of like what the camera sees and how it's supposed to look. And
Mhm.
so you're using a color correction tool to create the settings, and when you like the way it looks, like what you see is what you get. And then like you save that file out, and that's your LUT, and that can be put into the camera um as a reference. But then what's always exciting is that everything is preserved like naturally, so you have so much latitude in where you can go. Yeah, you're not locked in, which is a little different from like when we used to film on 35 or on 16, which is just a slightly different workflow. But that's where you need to work with an experienced DPs that really understand the latitude of that negative.
Mhm. So I'm asking all these questions maybe because I talked to a filmmaker today, a very indie, rising filmmaker, who said their producers didn't think they needed a colorist, and people need a colorist. They do.
Yeah, even because I deal with post, and when we have a distribution partner early on, it's always important to think about what do we get working towards, what's our end elements, and how are we delivering, and then I kind of work backwards in that. And and I've always been such kind of like I love preserving quality resolution as much as possible. So whatever we're filming on, whatever that medium is, let's preserve that quality throughout the whole process. Whether or not we need that super high resolution, I think having it gives us more options in the end. But now we're seeing 4K TVs are out, and so like Ultra HD is an option for people who want that. And I mean, that's the way I like watching movies when I'm renting them at home, is in the highest resolution. Like, that's the way the filmmaker intended. But then there's the other flavors. There's the HD, and I suspect, I guess maybe standard def may exist somewhere, but yeah, it's something that I think is important, working out. And so having that workflow and getting your your post partner early on can help you establish that final look. And so I don't think you have to carry them necessarily colors on the whole run of show, and then it's it just depends on your budget ultimately, and and how you want to use your resources. But I do think like having a session with the colorist early on in pre-production, ideally in conjunction with the camera test. So when you're going out to film with different lenses and different cameras, and you're trying to see, ideally you have a full makeup and costume test as well, so we can really get that. Then you can take it into the DI, play with it, and see how much it's going to be able to go from checking all the contrast, everything, and then it's informative, but at the same time, like could you do without? Absolutely. We've done it for years before this technology became available. So
this is a technical question, but it's also maybe a spoilery question, so feel free to go like, sorry dude. But the reference points for X, I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is obviously a big one. For Pearl, Wizard of Oz is obviously a big one. Do you have reference points for MaXXXine? Because looking at that, like the VHS and also that silver logo, which I'm just kind of fascinated by, that metallic logo, I can't quite put my finger on it. It's kind of Cronenbergy. Do you have...
that's a great description. I mean, I think like I don't have any specifics per se. I would say that like each of these movies represent an era of filmmaking, and that's the kind of mantra that Ty's taking into this third one. And it's 1985. Yeah, those titles are very exciting, and our longtime collaborator Neil Jonas did the titles in both X and Pearl, and this little MaXXXine teaser.
Yeah, I'm getting Verhoeven and Cronenberg vibes, which I love because it's so very, I mean, Verhoeven is pretty online thematically but I'm just guessing. I'm just throwing out guess.
Well, it's like, it's all that. It's like, because I'm picturing like, the video store with all the VHS box covers. And it's like when, movies were coming left and right. And it was like, a new era of filmmaking, if you will.
Yeah. And why haven't you made the space movie yet? Was it a budget thing, or is it just that you've been too busy with these?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time it was certainly a budget thing because it costs quite a bit of money to build a spaceship and to do it. And I think Ty is he's so fast. He wrote Pearl with Mia while he was in lockdown in New Zealand, and and the lockdown is about 2 weeks, and he's really has such a strong work ethic to do that. And I think with that project, like it didn't go, and he just kind of moved on to the next thing. And then I think every now and then we would talk about would we ever go back there? And it's like maybe, but like right now, like he's here, and it was the same thing when we were after, I believe it was like after The Sacrament. He kind of felt like he'd done what he could in horror with the means that were available. And so the opportunity to make a Western, which was something that, also another cinematic world that's, come before us. And so to get to do that, and, I think, he's good to put it out in the world, and then, it eventually kind of comes, back to him, and we got to make that film. And then, and after the last number of years not making films, he went off to direct a lot of series work and hone his craft. He was really committed to being like, I feel so seasoned that I want to bring that craft into my own movies. And so that's what we see, and you see a love for cinema in X and Pearl, and I assure you that you'll see it even more in MaXXXine. It's going to be real fun.
The last thing I want to ask, I know that the Oscars are not very nice to horror movies, but I really did mean it when I said I think her acting is some of the best acting I've ever seen. Is it worth mounting an Oscar campaign, or is that just someone else's decision?
I mean, I mean, I think, it's all about, I think, getting people to see the movie. And I think if enough people see the movie, I think it will come through, to light, on its own. I mean, it's an incredible performance. There's no denying that. And, we were, blessed to have Martin Scorsese speak so highly of the film. the last 2 weeks, and so that's just been such a warm blanket for all of us, and it's really great.